his was the only boat to arrive.
I think maybe it was a cow. I don't know.
There's a thank you letter from Lyndon Johnson.
There was even a monorail at one point to the east of us.
Plus, everybody forgets about pirates.
This is the coolest field trip I have ever been on.
I don't know, but I've been told, keep on dancing, won't ever get old.
Hello and welcome to the Long Island History Project, the podcast that brings you stories and interviews with people passionate about Long Island history. You can hear them all at longislandhistoryproject.org. Our opening music is courtesy of the Homegrown String Band. My name is Chris Kretz, and welcome also to the first in a series of special episodes. 3 in a row with 3 Long Island men that have something very distinct in common: the Vietnam War. The first 2 are veterans, the third is a lawyer, and I should say there's one other thing that they have in common. They've all been interviewed by my co-host on this miniseries, Long Island historian Christopher Verga. You may know Chris from his past books on the Long Island home front in World War II, or Saving Fire Island from Robert Moses. His latest, due out soon, is Cold War Long Island. Chris got in touch with the podcast because during the course of his research, he came to a realization.
I noticed there was so many interviews of World War II soldiers. Sayville Library has a great database, Smithtown. There's a lot of these interviews. Library of Congress has an exorbitant amount of interviews. But for Vietnam, it was much more narrower of a selection. And I thought that was interesting. You know, Vietnam War was technically 16 years. I thought that you would have a lot of time to have a collection develop, but there wasn't. So I started doing interviews, documenting, collecting these interviews, these experiences, and it started snowballing from there.
And how are you getting in touch with the people? How'd you find the vets?
Oh, it's all references. I connected with one VFW hall in West Hampton. All of a sudden, they have a friend over here and a friend over there. And the interviews have been growing, and a lot of people are willing to share their story. At first, they're a little hesitant because it was a very painful experience for a lot of them. Because unlike World War II, a lot of the Vietnam vets didn't get the same reception coming home. Unfortunately, there was a lot of animosity against the veterans, which was wrong on so many levels.
And the public perception or the popular culture perception from Apocalypse Now and Full Metal Jacket, I mean, it is rightly or wrongly or for good or ill informs what people think Vietnam was about. Did you know much going into the interviews? What was your perception of what the war was? Or? Well,
my dad had friends that were acquaintances, I like to say, that were in the war. And they always talked about this negative stereotype about it, but that was it, because most Vietnam vets didn't even talk about their service. The only way I knew they was in Vietnam was when they were complaining about their perception that vets were getting from that time era. Right. So
it seems, I'm just trying to think like how perception started to change over time, and some of it's probably generational, but I'm thinking like when the Vietnam Memorial came out, that seemed to focus a lot of new attention on the war and reevaluation of that experience. And when you look at the culture now, do you think people are more interested or have a different view of what Vietnam meant?
Well, I think there's a dramatic shift on how we celebrate our veterans coming home as compared to Vietnam. How people view the Vietnam veterans has definitely changed as well. Before that, it was a very painful experience. The blowback, the generalizations. And
I would imagine a very lonely experience for them because they, like you said, they wouldn't talk about it. They almost had to hide that status.
Yeah.
So let's talk. We'll be playing clips as we go through, but one of the ones that you shared was with Jack Parente, who's actually a Long Island native. How'd you get in touch with him?
Funny story. I'm a one thing I'm passionate on besides Long Island history is mountain biking.
Not a lot of mountains on Long Island.
Okay, well, you got a lot of great trails. Okay. In Glacier Ridge, you have something called the Old Ski Bowl, where it's actually artificial hills. And Concerned Mountain Bikers for Long Island made that into mountain biking trails. And there's not a lot of mountains on Long Island, but it's still technical. You still got your climbs, your descents. It's awesome. Great cardio in it. And I was coming out of the trail, and another guy, an older gentleman, was going in the trail. And it said NOM class of 68 on the back of the car. And I just started talking to him. we started talking about the bike. He had a Kona, and he called it the Frankenstein bike because he pretty much made it himself. Kona's a great mountain bike, by the way. And then we started referring to the sticker on the back of his truck, and we just took it from there.
And so he was born in Oyster Bay?
Yes, yes.
We grew up in, I wouldn't say the poorer section, because there is no poor section in Oyster Bay.
Yeah.
But we grew up with no more money or less money than anyone else around us had. So everybody was basically working. Most people were living pretty much day to day, although I didn't really realize it at the time. And everybody in that town was in the same boat, black, white, Spanish, whatever,
I think Jack also mentions, which I think a lot of people have said this, that he had no idea where Vietnam was, or what the clash had been going on since the early '60s, and before that with the French. So they were not really up to date on the geopolitics of why were we even there.
The basic thoughts on Vietnam before I actually wound up there were pretty damn shallow.
Oh, wow.
Frankly. Didn't really think one way or the other about it too much. It didn't seem real at the time.
What did his experience tell you about how he got into the war? He was drafted.
The hardest part was explaining it to my father, who couldn't understand how I could be so frigging stupid as to get drafted out of my second year of college. And the man had a point. He couldn't talk for 3 days.
It surprised me on the amount of people that signed up versus drafted. You also got to realize, not so much Jack, but overall, a lot of people signed up because a lot of their parents were World War II vets, so their narrative of service to the country was a lot different. They didn't anticipate the blowback against veterans. It was honorable. They're coming back from their parents are the greatest generation, and they're following those footsteps for the most part. Long Island had the biggest population of World War II veterans. Well, one of the biggest populations of World War II veterans in the country, one of them.
The strange part about my generation is that we kind of grew up expecting that we were going to have to do this anyway. Grandpa did it, Daddy did it, Uncle Bob did it, Uncle Johnny did it, everybody I knew did it. Even the Scottish part of the family that immigrated after World War II, they were all in the British Army. So it was kind of almost expected that I would wind up in the military somehow.
So what struck you about his experience as he was going through basic training? What did you learn that you didn't know already, or what surprised you about before he got to Nam, let's say?
The funny thing about Jack was he became, he signed up for every type of school and every type of training before he went to Nam. That was interesting.
To try to prolong that.
Yeah, try to prolong it. I thought that was actually pretty funny.
And the drill sergeant stands up and says, "Who wants to try that?" And I looked up at him and I said, "Yeah, I'd give that a try, Sarge." They sent me directly to Airborne AIT in Fort Gordon, Georgia. I went to jump school in Fort Benning, went to an abbreviated ranger course. I tried to volunteer for something else and they wouldn't let me. And eventually they said, "Nope, that's it for you. Time for you to go to Vietnam."
So he wound up in the U.S. Army 1st Calvary Division doing recon.
Yes.
And it's fascinating to hear about his experiences. What struck you about his in-country experiences?
Well, there was some sad stuff, obviously, about the casualties of his unit, the amount of fire, the casualties of his unit. That was really bad. But when you're talking about these experiences on the ground, you try not to tread too hard on getting the questions and the answers. You let them talk about it because this is a very painful thing for them. So.
March 17th, 69, we were on a hilltop outside of Ben Hoa, which is sort of towards the westish of Vietnam, west of Saigon, more towards Cambodia. And we had just moved in and taken over this one little tiny hilltop from a bigger company. And then we went out, did a few patrols around the hilltop. Everything looked fine. We came back, set up, set up that night about 1 o'clock in the morning. We got hit by what they think was a reinforced battalion. It was over 500 guys. And they hit us hard, and by the end of the night, out of the 52, I believe we started with, we wound up with about 14 fully functional.
Oh my God.
So we got whittled down really quick.
They were basically going ahead of attacks, right? The recon, obviously.
Yeah.
And they were spending, did they say they would spend days on the ground sort of before the strike came in?
Yes, they'll spend days on the ground, recon. Yeah, they'll be, they'll pave the way for the wave of troops behind them. So, yeah, they literally led the way into very hostile territory. So, yeah, it was very brutal on his end.
You know, I've done some World War II projects, and you kind of, everyone I think has almost a map in their head of North African campaign and D-Day and where the Normandy beaches were. When your interviewees, narrators, when they talk about the geography of Vietnam and where they were in this campaign, and to me, it's not part of my education, which is sad, I think, or missed opportunity. Can you picture or tell us geographically where he was active, like, or give us a sense of, it was north versus south, basically, but where was most of this activity happening with you?
Well, that's interesting we bring that up when we compare to World War II. World War II, you could say, well, we're not far from the city. We're like on the outskirts of this city, that city. Even in North Africa, you could say you're on the outskirts of this old colonial post, et cetera, during World War II. This was jungle. This was very, very dense jungle. It was provinces. There's like, well, we were by this province. We think we were by the fishhook of Cavonia. So it's definitely different when it comes to World War II. World War II, you had urban assaults in the forest, but you actually had an idea where you were going. For Jack and the other veterans I interviewed, they're like, well, I was in this province. Comes out to them pretty much describing a county. So right. It's more of a vague picture, and it's even a vaguer picture for them because they're following troop movements.
Right, and you hear about a lot of battles of like a geographic formation, but not a city or something.
Yeah, and the other thing about the Viet Cong, Viet Minh, and these militias and armies that America was going in there to combat, they were extremely mobile. They were probably even more mobile than a fascist Italian army. Mm-hmm. They had tunnels. Their movement was quicker. They were in and out. They didn't have the heavy tanks, the arsenal. So following them, it's a lot harder to pinpoint exactly where.
Which leads to one of the major tactics of how did the army move to clear a lot of that jungle out, which comes up in a lot of these interviews. Can you tell us about what they told you about what we now know as Agent Orange, but it's interesting they didn't call it that back then.
No. Many of them didn't know what it was. It was deforestation agents, Agent Orange, and apparently there's different agents, Agent White, but it's a chemical that literally destroys the forest. It kills everything. Jack refers it as death.
The Agent Orange was a very spooky thing. After about 3 weeks or so, there was absolutely nothing alive. You know, it didn't just kill the trees; it killed everything.
Oh wow!
And there were no more insects, no more birds. There were no more geckos on the ground. It was nothing.
And a lot of the soldiers were told, "Oh, it's not going to affect you. It's okay." And a lot of them were sleeping in it, taking baths in it. They were having a drinking water sources from it.
Our criteria was if you looked into the water and something was swimming in it, insect, larva, whatever, it was okay. If there was nothing swimming, don't drink the water, you know. And basically we just kind of strained it out a little bit, put it into our canteens, popped in an iodine tablet, and drank it right out of the bomb craters.
So this definitely caught up with them later on, following the war. You see, that's another thing about the Vietnam veterans. They were getting it from both angles here. When they were coming home, they were disrespected, and during the war, they were practically poisoned and lied to, and it had effects. And this is something we should not forget. So we shouldn't repeat this with anyone that serves their country, regardless of what you think about a war.
Right. I think you had asked Jack about. It seems like he said as the new recruits came in, who had seen some of the protests going on back home already, were bringing a new attitude into the mix.
Yeah, the hostilities from the civil rights movement and all the blowback against a lot of the segregation now, segregation forever type situation in the South. It was coming into the ranks. Well, I don't know if I shared this one. There was another person I interviewed. There was white medics. They didn't want to take care of black soldiers that were injured on the field. So this was definitely later on in the war. And all the civil rights strife that was going on was definitely going into the ranks.
Right, and I think he mentioned some of the newer recruits were saying, "I'm not going on patrol. Don't you know what's going on? Don't you know they're lying to like I guess the Pentagon Papers had come out, and so they were coming in with more information about the situation."
So they rebuilt the company from scratch, and when they did that, they took a few experienced people from other companies and put them in, but mostly they put in fresh recruits that were, drafted, and then we wound up with the same kind of problem as the other companies were running into, where people would just sit down and say, "Shit, no, man, didn't you read the Pentagon Papers? I ain't going on patrol." You got to be crazy to. They're going to pull us out of here next year. Why would you want to go do that?
So Jack left 1970. What do you recall of Jack's story of coming home?
There were enough new people coming in that I was talking to, so that I got the impression of what was going on back in the States was kind of like the initial peace marches, except like way, way worse, and that attitudes were much more polarized than they were before, and I should really watch my ass when I came home. And I did. I got to San Francisco, ditched the uniform, went to a store, bought a pair of bell-bottoms, hung out in San Francisco for, I don't know, a week or so, and slowly but surely tried to work my way back to New York, and eventually did finally just jump on the flight I was supposed to get and went home. But I was very conscious that we weren't well thought of.
You know something? It's not just Jack, but it's everyone at this point. Everyone was told, don't wear your uniform. Don't go out in your uniform. There's going to be blowback. There's animosity. And that's pretty much what I got from everyone. That story was aligned, and it was kind of horrible. You had to take your uniform off in order to come home.
Can you fill us out a little on when Jack came home, he came back to the island?
Yeah. Well, when he came back to the island, it was interesting. So a couple of things stick out. That when he went to join the VFWs, a lot of the World War II vets were saying, well, we're veterans of real wars. So there was a divide there. So that. And
I'm just curious. So when they said real war, because what in their mind, in the older generation's mind, made it not a war?
Well, you know what it was? I think there was such a bad stigma with Vietnam at the time. They were trying to distance themselves with that. The Vietnam veterans were getting so much bad press. Mm-hmm. So there was a breakdown of trust with the federal government, and they were taking it out on the veterans coming home because they represented, according to a lot of the people, this is very, very wrong on so many levels, but they represented the status quo. They represented what they were frustrated with. So let me take it out on this guy, which is wrong. Right. Because he's not the guy writing the policy.
Right. What control did he have over it?
He's victimized just as much as you. Yeah. So the funny thing about Jack with his coming home experience sticks out, which is hilarious, he told me, but it's true. He said it was cool to be a Vietnam vet when Rambo came out. As soon as Rambo came out, it was okay to be a Vietnam vet again. To be a Vietnam vet in general. And I thought that was, he made a joke of it, but at the same time, it was kind of sad.
Yeah. Well, and I think you look at it as an 80s movie, a Stallone movie, but unless you were a Vietnam vet, you don't get why that could have been so important to them to have that portrayal.
No, of course. Having that portrayal in a positive light is good and all. But, to have a movie do that portrayal. And,
right, because it didn't come from... Right, no one else was doing it for you.
That's horrible.
So what was your sense of how he views Vietnam now, or has it changed?
God, man, I've never trusted the government since. If they can't tell the truth an unwinnable war, then you can't count on the government telling the truth about anything at all. And I still firmly and solidly believe that. Never believe what they say, because it's probably not completely true.
Not just Jack, but a lot of the soldiers you talk to, most of them, some of them don't view it this way, but most of them, unfortunately, they view the war as something that had no effect, which is sad. You know, you have 58,000 that were killed, 3,000 missing in action still, and they still view it as something that had no impact. But it did. It had a big impact. You know, it can be argued various ways. I like to think of it that it, you know, China was limited on its growth in the region when you think of it on a broad perspective. Taiwan is Taiwan today because Vietnam was kind of the test subject. You know, how far would the West go? You know, and like once again, it's horrible. A lot of people died. I'm not advocating for war whatsoever, but you know, what effect did it have? That's what we're trying to argue about here. But a lot of them don't see that. They don't see the. It's like, yeah, it just happened. They don't see their spot in history.
And so how's Jack doing?
Jack is once again, he has cancer on and off. Unfortunately, it's bladder cancer. But the good news is he's getting a little bit better, and he's back on his bike.
That's good.
So he's a trooper, Jack, hands down. He's not doing Glacier Ridge as much, but okay. You know, he's getting up there. We're hoping to be doing a ride later in the summer.
I just want to say, first of all, thank you to Jack Parente for his service and for allowing us to share this story with a wider audience. He was interviewed by Christopher Verga, who has made it his mission to record oral histories with as many of Long Island's Vietnam veterans as he can. If you or someone you know has a story to tell about Vietnam and would like to get in touch with him, his email is chrisv1081@hotmail.com. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, we are at longislandhistoryproject@gmail.com. And you'll find links to related information in our show notes at longislandhistoryproject.org, including a picture of Jack and a map of Vietnam and some other research sources if you want to go deeper. It is a history worth studying. Our outro music is Capering by the Blue Dot Sessions, used under an Attribution Non-Commercial 4.0 international license. And just to recap, this is the first of a planned 3-episode miniseries, so make sure you are following the podcast in your app of choice or have us bookmarked, because next time out you will be hearing from Brooklyn-born, Massapequa-raised Joseph Giannini.
We were about to be inducted into the Army, and 2 Marines walked in dress blues, and they said they were looking for volunteers for the finest fighting force in the world. And I was looking at them, and they looked very impressive, and I thought I was on my way to Vietnam, and I thought that I'd have a better chance surviving with Marines because of their rep. They never leave anyone behind, and I thought I could serve in the Marine Corps. So I raised my hand. I volunteered for the Marine Corps. I enlisted right then and there.